Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Hello, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to creating conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Tuesday, October 8th, and I'm Cynthia Connolly, Director of Programming here at the City Club. I am pleased to introduce today's forum, presented in partnership with Sisters of Charity Health System and part of our Education, Innovation, and Authors in Conversation series. Today's guest, Dr. Kate Anderson Foley, is a transformational leader with significant experience leading public school districts and states toward equitable and integrated services for all learners. Her work is grounded in social justice and breaking down the barriers for children who have historically been marginalized. Kate is also the founder and CEO of the Education Policy and Practice Group, and teaches a graduate-level special education law course to aspiring principals and superintendents through the lens of equity and the higher standard. Today, we are looking forward to hearing about her latest book, Radically Excellent School Improvement, Keeping the Students at the Center of It All, which presents a model for ambitious improvement and tireless focus that ensures every student grows, thrives, and achieves their fullest potential. Moderating the conversation is Sarah Ellicott, Executive Director of Minds Matter Cleveland, a nonprofit working to prepare high school students from low-income families to get to and through college. Sarah serves on the board of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District and has a professional background in educational nonprofit leadership, as well as immigration law and civil rights advocacy. Looking forward to incredible conversation. If you have a question for our speaker, you can text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794. And City Club staff will try to work it into the second half of the program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kate Anderson Foley and Sarah Ellicott.
All right, Kate, I'm thrilled to be here to talk with you today about your new book, Radically Excellent School Improvement. Tell us about the work that brought you here to authoring this book, and tell us about the title. It's very ambitious. I love it. Want to hear more.
Well, thank you for having me. I could tell you that my life story, both personal and professional, are the things that brought me here today. I have been a student on the margins, believe it or not. And I saw, we talked about this earlier, you talk about how people have different expectations for you depending on how they view you. I was that student, and so having to fight for the right to a good education. Professionally, I wanted to kind of bring that forth and pull that thread in life to say, we all deserve the best education possible. From that, you have to kind of suit up for that. Because of that, I've always thought of radically excellent school improvement, not from this wild notion of revolution, but really what radically excellent is. And it is a focused and determined, integrated process that sees all of our students as capable, and we, the adults, making sure that the system is there to support and advance. It takes it away from remediation to acceleration. And that's what radically excellent school improvement's all about, a tireless focus, a relentless pursuit.
Love that, relentless pursuit of excellence. All right, so early on in the book, you talk about unpacking the school improvement process. I'd love to talk more about that, and especially the piece around understanding the story that the data is telling, and then how adults, you mentioned adults in the system, use practices in the classroom, in the district, to kind of unpack that data and use it toward excellent outcomes.
So the school improvement process is just that. It's big and bulky, right? But in education, probably a lot of industries, but in education, it's always additive. We're going to add this initiative, we're going to add this, we're going to add that, and then pretty soon, what are we improving? We don't really know. The radically excellent school improvement process starts to pare things down, makes sense, but here's the difference. It anchors in the interdependencies across and within the organization. So less is more, it's very focused, and then we start to look at, well, how do we, now that we've got our goals based on the data, and I'm going to talk about this, it's not top down, it's actually from the middle on out. Two ways that I go about and help organizations with this is through equity audit that I designed based on my years of experience. So I was in public education for close to 30 years before I moved into private practice. And throughout my career, I noticed that there was the others, the this and the them, this group and that group, instead of saying, what do we want for all of our students? And that if that's the moral imperative, then how does it have stretch? So I utilized and developed called an equity audit. It's a data gathering tool that, excuse me, looks at the 5 conditions for creating a holistic system. The first is, of course, the big context. Who's in our school district? You know, who's in the schools? What's the makeup? Who are the teachers? Who are the staff? What's the funding look like? Discipline, everything. Then you move into the students themselves. Who are those students and where are they getting the best education? Are they sitting idly in, just more remedial? How many people are in advanced coursework? How many girls? How many girls of color? How many boys? How many boys of color? How many students on IEPs? English learners? Who are they getting access to the most rigorous? And if not, why not? So we kind of go deep into that. The other is the practice, and that is around the adult implementation. It's all about the adult. So what competencies do they have to deliver that great, ambitious instruction? And then what supports might they need? Then there's the resources. So the fiscal, the material, and the human resources. How are they aligned? And I go into that within the book as far as like creating those interdependencies. And then finally, the governance structures. So depending on whatever organization you have, be it a board of education, board of directors, what have you, how are we working together by keeping students at the center of it all? So all along the way, the decision points, there's going to be student, 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 and then how do we interact? You mentioned about how to situate the adults. One of the most powerful practices is through the collaboration structure at schools. So districts have their structure and the leadership team, schools have their structure. In Ohio, they're called teacher-based teams. Probably have heard that. And it's a way to come around to the content. How do we know students are learning? What's the evidence that they're going to learn? What do we do for students who haven't learned the skill yet? And then what do we do for students who've already gotten the skill and are just sitting idly in the classrooms? And so there's a lot of research on this, and that is a high leverage strategy that every school improvement effort should have. And when I mention school improvement, I'm talking from district down to schools, down into the classroom. So that's a big one. The second strategy, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit, is coaching. That is a high leverage strategy both for the leadership as well as instructional. So I work with districts on strategic planning, equity audit, and then implementing that coaching model across and within the organization.
Great. I do want to talk more about coaching, but first I want to go back to what you said about adults and expectations of students, right? And I love that in the book you talk about, the idea that schools are meant to focus on whether students are learning and not just whether adults are teaching.
Right.
And there's that piece of interrogating around whether and how students are learning. If a student is sitting in the classroom on their cell phone, the focus does not become why is the student, or get the student to stop doing that, but more so what's behind it. Why is the student disengaged? Why are they sitting in the classroom on their phone, and what can adults do about it? So I'd love to hear you talk more about those expectations that adults are setting and what it looks like in practice.
That is the magic key right there. And we're experiencing it now before the pandemic, but clearly after the pandemic. Engagement, disengagement, I should say, is the number one thing. That coupled with the notion of what you just mentioned, in education, oftentimes it's, well, I've taught it. They didn't get it. I'm moving on. It's the pacing guide. It's whatever. But we flip it. That's radical excellence. We flip it to say, how do I ensure that the student is learning and not just that I'm teaching it? And so when you take that perspective, then you're going to start looking at things through more of an objective lens and being able to say, how do I know that they've gotten it? Well, I need to have evidence. I need to have the data. And that's where not only the teacher-based teams, but the good practice is that you're looking at things from a formative standpoint. So inform, I'm informing every step along the way. There are many ways to do that, from exit tickets to stop and chat to 1 minute write. I mean, there's a variety of ways that teachers can know if students are learning. But if they aren't learning, or they're almost there, what are we, the adult, going to do to ensure that they have gotten it? I believe very strongly that the most powerful way to improve outcomes for students is through the adults. But if the adults in the system don't have what they need, then it's incumbent upon leadership to make sure that they have what they need. And then you build up that shared accountability.
And what do they need? What have you seen?
Yeah, so across the country and just recently in Singapore, we're all dealing with the same thing. Students are disengaged if they are there. So there's huge amount of absenteeism. What are they doing? Their parents, for a variety of reasons, might not even know that they are not in school as much as they need to be in school. Or they've created this permission structure of, oh, you don't feel good, then you could stay home, whatever the variety might be. And I am not here to judge that. But what I am saying is, because absenteeism is such a pervasive issue right now, it's an all hands on deck, but it can't be scattershot. It's got to be aligned to the school improvement process. So after school programs, before school programs, mental health service providers. I know when I was in Chicago, we brought service providers into the schools. We created the Medicaid reimbursement structures. We created a lot of different things, and that way the parents and the students could have the social services they needed. So those are two big things. I mentioned this morning, that this is the new real issue now. So you've got disengaged students, and they're not there. But the ones who are there, we've said, now we're banning cell phones. Now what? Well, what are we going to do with them? They're not going to magically turn their attention to the lesson at hand. So how does education need to change in a way that's going to make students go, oh, I see myself in that. It's hard. Maybe it's around reading or math or science or what have you. It's hard. But here's the executive functioning skill that's required for every student to be successful: persistence. It is not an intrinsic thing for a lot of people. It has to be starting externally. So extrinsically, how are we going to do that? There's a variety of ways to do it, and certainly people who are in schools with the most needy have very behavioral types of way. But we need to really start thinking about how do we create the industry-forward education that our students are craving. They're craving this. So if there's a symptom, they're disengaged. My symptom would be why? Why are they disengaged? Do we ask our students that? Maybe they don't have the words, but we really need to ask our students that and then be able to start creating ambitious education that not only is culturally and linguistically responsive, but has a pathway for them. Can I just mention, students with disabilities, students on IEPs, there's laws. In Ohio, it goes through the age of 21 that they're covered unless they graduate with a regular diploma. I speak about it in the book. It's really critical that all students, including students with disabilities, graduate with a regular diploma. Legally, yes, it ends the IDEA, but it changes the trajectory of their lives because they can get a job, pay into Social Security, advance in their careers, and live a good life, right? And there's a portion in the book where I talk about specifically students with disabilities, the Route 129 companies, who are the tech companies who actually value students with disabilities, certain profiles, because of their on time, their detail, they're great candidates to have. So there's many companies. IBM is one of the top companies that bring in students and people with disabilities just for that. So graduating with a regular diploma allows that to happen. If they don't have a regular diploma, oftentimes companies are prohibited from hiring them.
Interesting. And you do focus, a lot of your work and a lot of the examples in the book are focused on students with disabilities. And you talk about how they are first and foremost regular education students.
Yeah.
I remember that quote many times. Can you talk more about what that means for not just their educational experience when we view them that way or a different way? Mm-hmm. And you did talk a little bit about the post-secondary options.
So I focused it on special education because it was lacking in other school improvement models. There's this dichotomy that, well, we're talking about school improvement, and then special education is its own thing, so go talk to the director, that kind of thing. Instead of saying just what you said, students with disabilities are first and foremost regular education students. They're students. They're covered under the Every Student Succeeds Act, right? And then they get some additional things because they have a certain disability and they meet the criteria. So I focused in on that from the standpoint of, I'm going to show you how this book is not the heavy academic. It's taking all those experiences and the work that I've done across to be able to say, so this is how you start to put things together. This is how you can start to, when we talk about equity or we talk about all, are we talking about all? Because if we're talking about all, that's hard work. But when we talk about it in the sense of, here's a school improvement process from district to school into the classroom, and the effective practices of coaching, leadership and instructional, teacher-based teams, and then I show people specifically how to meet the legal and ethical requirements per the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And by doing that, we're no longer just adding all these things, and it's no longer siloed. We're actually creating a cohesive improvement process that the data can speak to individual accountability per the IEP and everything else, or EL or at risk, and as well as everybody else. So the more that you can use data that is everybody's and then tailor it individually, you will be able to have less legal fees because special education is very expensive. If there's superintendents in the room, you know what that sounds like. as well as doing the right thing, and then being able to ensure that they have a graduation that's worth something.
Right. So we're sitting up here on the stage talking a lot about what schools and teachers should be doing, thinking about the necessity for coaching in the improvement process. A lot of times we think about coaching as an individual need.
Yeah.
How do we get this individual staff member to be successful? But you talk about it as a requirement for collective impact,
Right.
which makes sense, right? Coaching comes from sports. In sports, the
Exactly.
collective impact is the team as a whole winning, not about one individual player, right? So how do you, tell us about your model for coaching, and then tell us about how you are asking district leaders to measure success when it comes to coaching as well.
So when I do executive coaching, we work, and it's performance-based, we work on a professional goal that's aligned to the school improvement process. So the superintendent or the CEO, and then into the principals. And then I coach on that. The second part of that, though, is the personal. So I always have a professional and personal. The personal is tangentially related to the professional. So as an example, being able to bring your best self, time management, detaching from work, like those kinds of things. If you have that in place, then you're better able to perform the duties of your role. The metrics that we use are on a trimester basis. That's the shortest. So sometimes principals or superintendents want to do everything on a quarterly basis or trimester. If that's your natural point, then do it. But I grabbed this from my colleague, Dr. Douglas Reeves, and he uses a 100-day. So do something for the 100 days, and that's how you're monitoring it. And then you have the ability to course correct and or establish new goals. So doing it that way. And then I help them pivot to be the coach. So leadership coaching, executive coaching, is about building the skill set and competencies of the person so they in turn can pivot and be the coach to their leaders. And therein lies the difference. Some coaches just, want to take your money, right? But that's not me. It's like I want to radically improve schools for every student. And this high leverage strategy is one. The other is the collective impact that it has, and there's research behind that collective piece for leadership, and then as well as the instructional coaching model. So the coach sits in between district, school, principal piece, the coach, and then the teacher-based teams. And that person's able to have both of those views and be able to connect, but then get granular into the classroom. Okay, we've got this big goal. How does it look at the classroom level? How will we know that what we are doing, classroom teacher, is making a difference? And that's the cycle of coaching.
I love that. And thinking about, specifically instructional coaching, teachers these days are overloaded with so many responsibilities, right? There's so many challenges that we bring to the schoolhouse door, and we expect schools to manage so many different things in supporting their students. How does coaching fit in? How do you kind of get buy-in, and what's the process for building it into a district or school culture when, teachers and leaders have got to step into a classroom and focus on the students that are in front of them on a day-to-day basis? How do the two fit?
So I work with school teams. Oftentimes I'm brought in to do the strategic planning, and so then I'm intentionally putting it within that to build up, again, the capacity of the leader, but then help the instructional piece see the alignment. I write about force multiplier. The single fingers are just that, but when you put them together, there's force behind it. That force multiplying is alignment. So it's not, therein lies the difference, right? School improvement process that sits on a shelf or looked at annually versus, no, this is the way we're doing business. So when you ask about how do we get the teachers to, the commitment piece? It's transparent. It's part of our school improvement process. This is a strategy. This is a lever of improvement. So we're going to put instructional coaching into place. But the principal and the CEO also say, and I've got to coach too, right? So it's not from a deficit standpoint, but it's from that strength-based standpoint. And so that's where within the process that I use, and I mentioned the equity audit and that deep root analysis, but then I do something that is, I'll say it, revolutionary. And that is, I have banned the tiers of MTSS, and I've put together, based on years of experience, based on the research, based on how I'm working with people, and I've created a double helix system of support that's non-directional. So if you think about the current model is a triangle, facing up or facing down, but it's still directional. We funnel kids. We say that it's the student instead of we the adult. Student has the profile. They're coming in with their invisible backpacks of all the things that they come in with. But we have to ask ourselves, so what are we going to do about it? If the student was able to do the things that we wanted them to do, well, then they'd already be doing it. So there's a gap. There's gaps, huge gaps, more so now. The double helix allows for the clarity because the improvement process has offered that clarity. It's spelled it out. Everyone sees themselves in it. There's intentional interdependencies. For example, teaching and learning, human resources. Like that would be a quick one. Business office, another department. Intentional. We share a goal. We're monitoring it. The second is that design where we situate the adults inside the classroom. So I'll go back to special education because I called it out in the book. We're not saying that one group of people are divorced from the other. We're putting them back into the classroom where they need to be, not just as glorified assistants, but intentionally building, scaffolding, delivering differentiated instruction or whatever the strategy is, but it's got stretch to it. The other part of that is within the design feature itself. So teacher's lesson plan, et cetera, they have to come with the group that they are working with to say, okay, well, here's our student profile. Here's the group of students that we're working with. We need something. Maybe it's on executive functioning. Maybe it's on working on written expression. It could be a variety of things. But bring the experts in and let us all work together rather than in isolation. That's the collective efficacy that has been proven to be effective. And so now we really need to do that in this post-pandemic world. And then finally is the shared accountability. Shared accountability is the number one non-negotiable, right? Everyone sees themselves in the solution. Everyone's accountable. So we can't hand it off to, well, it's those kids or it's that teacher or whatever. It's like, nope, we're all doing this because we all know what the goals are and we all know what the cycle of improvement looks like.
So every adult in the system has a role to play.
Correct.
Okay. And that, you talk about the force multiplier.
Yes.
How do you identify what that is?
So it's tight alignment within the improvement process itself. So across and within. There's intentional interdependencies. That's part of the tight alignment. The second is that we all know it and we all are working on it. Third is whoever is walking through or working, so be it like myself when I go into classrooms or work at a district level, I'm listening for evidence of impact. I'm observing to see what is going on. I'm looking at the data. When we say, again, all students, but then when you dig deeper, large percent of students who are, one category or another, then how are they growing, right? So grow, thrive, and achieve. Those are the 3 ways to go about doing that. Ohio's report card has achievement, gap closure, things like that. Got to dig in between that. Who's growing, who's not, why not? And then be able to put in effective practices from there. And again, it goes back to what's good for all, and then even get more granular on what do we need for students who might be at risk, learning English. Our newcomers it's a big population, even more so now. So how are we creating the structures, not only in the classroom or in school, but also through the larger community, because that's what's needed.
Great. Wonderful. All right. Well, it's time almost to begin the audience Q&A. For our live stream audience or those just joining, I am Sarah Ellicott, Executive Director of Minds Matter Cleveland and moderator for today's conversation. We are joined by Dr. Kate Anderson Foley, author of Radically Excellent School Improvement and CEO of Education Policy and Practice Group. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, and those joining us via live stream at cityclub.org. If you'd like to text a question to our speaker, please text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794. And City Club staff will try to work it into the program. We ready for our first question?
It says, ultimately, no strategic plan or administrative initiative can be as effective as great teachers in the classroom. How do we make sure great teachers have great colleagues at every school?
That's the magic question, right? So if you want great teachers, you've got to support. And that's where my work comes in a lot. And I'll be honest, that's where I want to help. So I can do that through the structure with leadership team and everything else. But you're right. If we don't support teachers all along the way, they're not going to be able to do that. But here's the second part of that. We support and we support and we support, but then we have to hold people to account, right? This is about a child's life. And the trajectory of their life can change because we have great teachers. So we have to make sure that that shared accountability, everything's transparent, everyone knows what they're working on.
Thank you very much for your really thoughtful presentation and the amount of research that you've done to come to this point. I'm going to preface this question by saying that I come from a rural district in Portage County, which is a relatively rural county. And so this is a question sort of directed because many of the, a forgotten minority is the rural white kids. And if it takes a village to grow a child, it definitely takes a village to educate a child. And in particular, to fund the education. Here in Ohio, the differences between successful and unsuccessful education districts really is based on the funding. So it seems to me that your ideas are wonderful, but they have to be funded.
Right.
And therefore they have to be valued by those who vote. So I'm wondering, maybe this is another one of those magic questions. How do you implement your ideas in such a way that people will vote for school levies? Because they really don't know.
So historically, people don't vote for school levies once they don't have kids in the school district, right?
That's right.
And so that being said, when I was in Illinois at the State Department, We did work on a funding model, and it was bicameral. So we worked with the legislators and the governor's office, and we created a fair funding model that was student-based. As the assistant superintendent, they kept on trying to push out and silo special ed and the titles. And I kept pushing it back in and work behind the scenes and everything else. It finally got put into the overall funding model, and it was approved. Now, it's important to know, Illinois went from the last on their funding models to middle of the road. I'd say that's progress, right? So you have to get to the policy makers to help them understand what it is that you're trying to do and why it's important. What's the value statement? I do know what it's like working with districts in rural areas, because I did that in Illinois, close to St. Louis border, very far away. We've got them here in Athens County and other places, very rural. And that's where it's even more challenging, because the one person wears multiple hats. So that's why I'm saying we must look at the whole solution and not just say it's this funding stream and that funding stream. We always know student-based budgeting, here's a student, here's a dollar amount. Any federal to state, and that coming down the pike, it's added on. But here's the magic. Everyone has to understand, just because they're EL or at risk or special ed, it doesn't change the ambitious instruction. We still have to do the things that we need to do. So at a classroom level, that shouldn't matter. At the district level, that's where some of the push and pull comes from. And that's where I'm saying, when you create the interdependent goals, such as business services and teaching and learning or title, then there's a shared goal, because we understand what it is that we're working toward. So it's not isolated anymore. It's part of the whole. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dolores McCollum. I am a retired Cleveland social studies teacher and a classroom management student engagement consultant. My question for you is, what are 2 or 3 things you would suggest to transform teacher education programs that use a 19th century model to teach 20th century adults who teach 21st century students?
Preaching on that one. Preaching on that one. That's exactly why I felt compelled to write this book. We have to look at education as a business. And I mentioned that this morning. Education is a most political, complex organization. Nonetheless, we're a business, right? And our customer is the student. Many people don't agree with that. Many people just think it's somebody else. But the customer is our student. We have to have different higher ed credentialing from the state on down. Every teacher, and I've advocated this at the federal level all the way, teachers need to come out duly certified. So often, teachers have the one course in psychology or the one course in special ed, maybe no courses in behavioral modification, like the behavioral aspect. I always call it the social dimension of learning, right? Behavior has to be there in order for kids to access learning, right? So when I work with groups, it's always about keeping those things both top of mind, and that helping people understand if they're not accessing food, if they don't have stable housing, if they don't have this or that, they're not going to access learning. A bag of Cheetos on the train to school is not going to sustain the student for all day or until they get their next meal. So bringing that in, first and foremost, advocate and implore that the institutes of higher ed, that everyone comes out with dual certification. Not only will it address what you rightly said about, agrarian kind of education system, it'll attend to who the students are in real time, which again, that's why I wrote this. It has to be real time. It can't be this structure of, well, it used to be, or this and that, that, again, that triangle, pointing up or pointing down, funnel. What happens when we funnel our students? We, the adult, kind of gets the hands off. It's passive now, and then they go over there. And then they're siloed. It's interesting, and I mentioned this earlier, that we have to have a career-facing education system, but we have to have our students see the value in why they are doing what they're doing. If I can go online and get a degree or some certificate, a student might say, that's good enough for me. But they fail to see the future of unemployment, poverty, and all the things that go with that. Educators need to feel comfortable being uncomfortable to say, let's look at this industry credentialing kind of thing. That's why I mentioned Route 128 and those companies. Here's a statistic. I'm going to read this to you. So Georgetown University Education and Workforce did a study, and they predicted by 2031, at least 70% of the people in the United States will need a degree or other post-secondary credential to meet the labor needs. Yet, only half, not even half, of the Americans have such qualifications. Less than half. So we're already on this path, and now schools are dealing with low enrollment, like there's not as many kids, absenteeism, discipline, disengaged. So we've got to interrupt that, and this is a way to do that. And then I have a colleague in Canada who's finished writing a book where she actually has students take part in the lesson planning themselves and really start to, we got to put kids at the center of it all again, instead of the stand and deliver. That's why the notion of ensuring students learn rather than just that they're taught really shifts that.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Allison Black. I'm an executive director of America Scores Cleveland, which is an after-school program here in Cleveland, serving right now 15 public schools. You mentioned all hands on deck are needed, including the after-school space.
Yep.
And bringing resources to the buildings. So what is your advice to the after-school community partners here in Cleveland on what we can do to convince top educational leaders that our programs are just as important to each child's success and that we are part of that shared responsibility? And how can we convince these leaders that they can't do the work alone, and by decimating the after-school space, they're actually creating more inequities?
Well, I think saying that right there is the value statement. But then I would focus in on the social dimensions of learning, and those executive functioning skills of organization, persistence, being able to complete something like a task, being able to then see, okay, you're doing these things in school, here's the executive functioning piece or the behavioral things, and linking it to career. Like I would just do that triangle over and over again, because you're right, schools can't do that by themselves. I would submit they've never really been able to do it by themselves, that there's always been a community need. I always valued community partnerships. I saw them for just an amazing facet for the student, because the student's going to be the youth. If we're lucky, they'll stay here. But you want them to stay here with the rigorous and ambitious education so they can be a good citizen and contribute.
Hi there, my name is Stacy Schroeder. I'm a workforce development consultant, mainly in the manufacturing space.
Okay.
Also a board member for Youth Opportunities Unlimited, which focuses on that 14 to 24 age range. So I want to ask from sort of the employer perspective. I work with a lot of companies who I think have expectations that don't align with what kids are coming out of K through 12 with. So I'm wondering, how can your framework, your model, maybe help employers be better prepared to be a part of the solution to getting kids up to speed?
Yeah, so I would intentionally build in and sharing that improvement process itself. That's number one. But I would intentionally bring in, so how can you be a part of this goal? Bring them in. I'm working with a group of charter schools right now, and that's kind of what we've done. We brought the friends in, and they were at the board retreat, and they intentionally, interestingly wanted to be a part of the solution, and we found the spaces for them to be, here's your responsibility and here's the metric, and all of a sudden it's not, that's nice you're doing that, but we're doing this over here. Not connected at all, right? And then friends, the friends of that industry go back into the classroom themselves and set that cycle up. So what do the employers need? What are the characteristics? Name 3 of them, not a ton of them, right? What are the top 3? What's the thing that's going to get you in the door and keep you employed? Focus on that. And then go to the next tier and the next tier. But that's how we start. But students, no matter what we do, students have to see themselves in it. If they don't, they'll just see that it is being done to them. And that's disengage, disengage, disengage. The idea of absenteeism, the idea of discipline, and how you can change the trajectory of your life, those things start, education's cumulative. So when they're little and someone says you're not good enough, or why don't you go over there, or, you're loud, you're a behavior problem, you're this or you're that, it's cumulative. And no employer is gonna do that. Yeah. So that's where I would start.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Merle Johnson. I'm a member of the Ohio Board of Education, and I also taught in Cleveland 40 years. You talked a lot about what adults should be doing, but I didn't hear a lot about the role of the student voice in advocating for school improvement.
Yep, thank you for that. So within the book, there's a large section on student, and I'll give a quick example. Student voice, not only in the instruction itself, but in the feedback loop. So in the best of circumstances, teachers have like a rubric that they're using for writing or what have you, and a section of that then is the student. So the student is assessing themselves. That's one example. Another example is when goal setting, mutual goal setting. So the student, how do you think you're going to do in this particular unit? It's a powerful practice. That student has their voice, but it also then increases the engagement. I said, I'm going to get an A for this unit or a B for this unit. I'm going to start to work with you. Teacher, student is able to better work with you instead of just sitting there passively receiving instruction.
Good afternoon. My name is Mitty Davis-Jones, and I am the grandparent of a student who is the beneficiary of special education services here in the Cleveland area. And I also serve on a parent advisory board at the high school that he attends. So my question is regarding the school improvement processes that you discussed. Are there any places that this has been implemented that you can share, maybe one example of some of the successes and challenges that you encountered in the process?
Yep. So I'm going to speak in generalities because I don't want to, call anybody out. There, like I said, I'm working with a group of charter schools here in Cleveland that is doing that. It is a robust process because there's been years of siloing. So they've been really working on the leadership side, and then this year implementing the teacher-based teams in a very focused way. So I'm working with the leadership team on that and connecting the metrics for responsive classroom, so the behavior, the social dimension, English language arts, and math. Like those are the 3 anchors that they're working on, and they're doing it at the district level in each of the schools, and then the coaching on leadership, the coaching on the instructional side. So they're aligning it. Other places that I have worked on it from various parts of the country is just that. The hardest part has been pulling back in special education. And that's why I made such a point of this. Pulling back in special education, but not from you're the special educator, so really those are your kids, and it's that, it is incredible the vast differences of how people perceive special ed, but then how they deliver it. There are still parts of the country that inclusion is not a thing. Now think about that. Inclusion is not a thing, that they still relegate kids away. And then the other is, it's very aligned, like an East Coast school district that I worked in that really did this, that are actually doing the comprehensive part of it. It's not a quick fix. The deep learning takes place, the support takes place, and then you gradually, a consultant gradually moves themselves away because you want the long term to be there. The rescue money that has been used, and I always term it as razzle dazzle, these vendors come in and they razzle dazzle, like, yeah, spend all your money. But did it build up the collective efficacy of the educators? Oftentimes it didn't. And so now we're at this stage where we really need to build up the collective efficacy of all educators in the system and then within the larger community.
Hello, my name is Joan Spurl. I'm with the Literacy Cooperative. I'm a former kindergarten, preschool, and Head Start teacher, and director now of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library at the Literacy Cooperative for Cuyahoga County. We know that so much of brain development is completed before a child even enters kindergarten, and that children who start behind often stay behind. It's harder to catch them up. So what are your wishes for our society in terms of programs, policies, and practices we would put in place to support families and young children before they are school age?
Thank you for that question. In my professional practice, I was in charge of it all. So from birth through, 21. First, what I did, I put together some teaching and I went to physicians' offices. How I started to build network, that's how I started building relationships, and that's how I started educating. Understanding that certain brain development, yes, there's some things that are a little bit harder wired, but more and more the research is showing it's actually more resilient than we thought. So unless there's some environmental issue, and again, speaking from my experiences, asthma and lead were the two things that was just, it's heartbreaking, knowing that society could do that. So my wish is that we address the environmental issues that are keeping students away. That does have some long-term effect. That has some permanence to it. And then I would also start to work with families. Now, again, my professional capacity, I always had parent academies, parent universities, always educated the parent from nutrition to social to this to that. It's important to remember that so many of our parents were children of parents who didn't have the things that maybe you and I had. That's a difference. No blame, it's just, again, meeting people where they are, critical. Meet people where they are and then lift them up and educate them. Oftentimes parents want that, right? So it's a way to get in, and then it's a way to build the partnership. Change happens from the inside out. It's never a top-down mandate, like, hey, we're gonna be socially, emotionally responsive to you. It just doesn't work that way. Change happens from the inside out. But the adults have to understand what it is that they're doing and have more precision. I love this, or I like the notion of pushing back on this, I'll say. When people say, oh, that's just good teaching. Is it? Because if it were just good teaching, I think we'd all do it. But if you don't have the wherewithal or understand the why, you are not teaching to the way our students need. Thus, you're not ensuring that they're learning.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Sharice Brown Gray, and I am here as a community partner with Sisters of Charity Health System and also Cleveland Central Promise. So as a community partner, aside from providing financial support by way of scholarships or giving teachers what they might ask for in a school supply list, how else might we be more effective with intentional programming and radical in our assistance for student and teacher success?
So do you sit with the leadership team to say, well, what are your goals that you're working on?
So currently, we will meet with teachers that are in the building because our focus is the central area. And we will ask them what some of their needs are as we are moving forward to a different service model in terms of what we do as an organization and how we assist the schools. We get suggestions, and then we will go in and fill in some of the gaps. But in terms of our programming, we work with students as well, more so with the students than the teachers. Nothing more beyond they have a request and we try to fulfill it. So how could we be more effective?
Right. So as you spoke, I was going through my head when I was a director and assistant soup, because I was over all of those things, the mental health side of things. And so looking at the data, listen to the teacher. Teacher voice is critical, but is it pervasive? So that's one thing. 2, looking at the data. 3, going to the director level to say, what are the issues? And then how do we start to build the connections? So school supplies are one thing, for sure, but let's get to the root of the root. What's keeping the students from exceeding? What's keeping the teacher from being the best that she or he can be? And then be able to go in there. The social service aspect is just highly critical, but I'd also then say, take a look at the Medicaid reimbursement structure itself, and then how can you start to feed yourself in there and then create those hubs to get into the school and create a model. Start small if you need to, but get in there and start to create a model for that.
Thank you.
Dr. Kate Anderson Foley and Sarah Ellicott.
Sarah!
Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech at cityclub.org. Today's forum is sponsored by the Sisters of Charity Health System and is part of our Education Innovation Series in partnership with Nordson, as well as our Authors in Conversation series in partnership with Cuyahoga Arts and Culture and the Cuyahoga County Public Library. Please be sure to check out our friends at MaxBacks. They do have copies of her book on sale, and she will be signing books in the library after the forum. Our gratitude as well to the great team at the Center for Education Leadership at Cleveland State University for their partnership on today's forum. The City Club would like to welcome guests at the tables hosted by the Greater Cleveland Schools Superintendents Association, Positive Education Program, the Shaker Schools Foundation, and the Sisters of Charity Health System. Thank you all for being here today. Coming up at the City Club on Thursday, October 17th, we are talking health equity, and we will welcome Dr. Ayla Stanford, former Regional Director of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services of the Mid-Atlantic, where she was appointed by President Biden. She will discuss her book, Take Care of Them Like My Own, Faith, Fortitude, and a Surgeon's Fight for Health Justice. You can get tickets to this forum and learn more about others at cityclub.org. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you once again to Kate and Sarah. I'm Cynthia Connolly, and this forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.